There is something deeply unsettling about the words we carry inside us and the ones we release into the world. Not all wounds are visible. Some are spoken into existence, shaped by the tongue, carried through tone, sharpened by intention. When we look at the theme Psalm 5, Evil Tongues Fall, we're not just examining others, we are invited to confront a more uncomfortable truth. What drives harmful speech in the first place? The psychological roots of harmful speech are rarely as simple as they appear on the surface. When someone speaks with cruelty, sarcasm, or deception, we are often quick to label the behavior as purely negative or malicious. But beneath that expression lies a more complex inner landscape, one shaped by past experiences, emotional wounds, and deeply ingrained patterns of thinking. Harmful speech is not just about what is said, it is about what is carried within. From a psychological perspective, the tongue often becomes an outlet for unresolved emotions. Anger that was never safely expressed, pain that was never acknowledged, and fear that was never understood can all find their way into language. When a person has not been given the space to process their inner struggles, those struggles do not disappear. Instead, they leak out, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in destructive ones. Words then become weapons, not necessarily because the person intends harm consciously, but because harm is what they have internalized. There is also the role of learned behavior. Many individuals grow up in environments where communication is shaped by criticism, blame, or hostility. If a child repeatedly hears harsh or belittling language, they may come to accept it as normal. Over time, this pattern embeds itself into their way of interacting with others. The tongue begins to mirror what the mind has been conditioned to believe, that power comes from dominance, that vulnerability is weakness, and that connection is maintained through control rather than understanding. Insecurity plays a significant role as well. When a person feels inadequate or threatened, they may use harmful speech as a defense mechanism. By putting others down, they temporarily elevate themselves. By spreading negativity, they divert attention away from their own perceived shortcomings. This is not a sign of strength, but rather an indication of fragility. The need to harm with words often reflects an internal struggle with self-worth. Another important factor is the lack of emotional awareness. Many people are disconnected from their own feelings. They may not recognize when they are hurt, anxious, or overwhelmed. Without this awareness, they cannot regulate their responses effectively. Instead of identifying and addressing the root emotion, they react impulsively. The tongue becomes the fastest way to release what they do not understand within themselves. In this way, harmful speech is often less about intentional cruelty and more about unconscious expression. There is also a cognitive aspect to consider. The beliefs a person holds about the world influence how they speak. If someone views others with suspicion, resentment, or judgment, their language will naturally reflect those perspectives. Thoughts shape words, and words reinforce thoughts, creating a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break. When negativity dominates the mind, it inevitably finds a voice. At the same time, it is important to recognize that understanding these psychological roots does not justify harmful behavior. The impact of words is real, regardless of their origin. Emotional wounds inflicted through speech can linger for years, affecting self-esteem, relationships, and mental well-being. Awareness of the root cause is not meant to excuse the harm, but to provide a pathway toward change. When individuals begin to explore the reasons behind their speech, they open the door to transformation. By acknowledging pain, challenging learned patterns, and developing emotional awareness, they can gradually shift how they communicate. The tongue, once used as a tool for harm, can become a channel for honesty, compassion, and connection. Words are not random, they are reflections. What we say to others is often a direct expression of what is happening within us. When we explore the idea that words are expressions of inner wounds, we begin to see speech not just as communication, but as a window into the emotional and psychological state of the speaker. Beneath every harsh tone, every cutting remark, and every act of verbal harm, there is usually something unresolved asking to be seen. Inner wounds do not always present themselves in obvious ways. They can be subtle, buried beneath years of coping mechanisms and defensive behaviors. A person who feels unworthy may not openly admit their pain, but it can surface in the way they speak to others through criticism, judgment, or dismissal. In this sense, harmful words are often less about the person they are directed at and more about the unresolved pain of the person speaking them. When someone has experienced rejection, betrayal, or neglect, those experiences leave an imprint. The mind, in an attempt to protect itself, may adopt patterns that push others away before they can cause harm again. Words become a shield, a way to maintain distance and control. Sarcasm, harshness, or even silence can serve as protective strategies. But while these strategies may offer temporary relief, they also prevent genuine connection and healing. There is also a tendency for pain to seek expression. Emotions that are not acknowledged do not simply disappear, they find other ways to surface. If sadness is suppressed, it may turn into irritability. If fear is ignored, it may manifest as anger. When these emotions rise to the surface without awareness, they often come out through speech. The tongue becomes the messenger of what the heart has been unable to process. In many cases, people are not fully conscious of this process. They may believe their words are justified, that their reactions are appropriate, or that others are the problem. This lack of awareness creates a cycle where inner wounds continue to influence outward behavior without being addressed. As a result, the same patterns repeat, and the same harm is carried forward into different relationships and situations. Another layer to consider is projection. Individuals often attribute their own insecurities or unresolved issues to others. For example, someone who struggles with feelings of inadequacy may accuse others of being incompetent. This projection allows them to avoid confronting their own discomfort, but it also distorts their perception of reality. Their words then are not based on truth, but on an internal narrative shaped by pain. At the same time, understanding that words are expressions of inner wounds invites a deeper level of empathy. It allows us to see beyond the surface of harmful speech and recognize the human struggle beneath it. However, empathy does not mean accepting or tolerating harmful behavior. It simply means acknowledging that behind the words, there is often a story that has not been healed. When individuals begin to take responsibility for their inner world, their speech naturally begins to change. As they process their emotions, challenge their beliefs, and develop self-awareness, the need to express pain through harmful words diminishes. Communication becomes more intentional, more honest, and more aligned with their true state of being. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires patience, reflection, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it is through this process that words can transform from instruments of harm into tools of understanding and connection. Psalm 5 presents a clear and uncompromising spiritual warning about the nature and consequences of harmful speech. It does not approach the issue lightly or ambiguously. Instead, it draws a distinct line between truth and falsehood, integrity and deceit, righteousness and corruption. Within this framework, the tongue is not seen as a neutral tool, but as a powerful force that reveals the condition of the heart and aligns a person either with what is just or what is destructive. The warning in Psalm 5 is not merely about external behavior, it points to a deeper spiritual reality. Words are not isolated actions. They are connected to intention, character, and ultimately accountability. The psalm emphasizes that deceitful and harmful speech is not hidden or insignificant. It is seen, it is known, and it carries weight. This introduces a level of responsibility that goes beyond social consequences and enters the realm of moral and spiritual truth. One of the striking elements of Psalm 5 is its emphasis on the incompatibility between falsehood and the presence of what is pure and just. It suggests that there is a natural separation between truth and deception, between those who uphold integrity and those who use their words to manipulate or harm. This separation is not arbitrary, it reflects an order in which truth sustains and falsehood ultimately collapses. Harmful speech in this sense is not just wrong, it is unstable. It cannot endure because it is not rooted in reality. The psalm also highlights the idea that destructive words are not without consequence. While harmful speech may seem effective in the short term, allowing individuals to gain advantage, control narratives, or diminish others, it carries an inherent self-defeating nature. Deception requires constant maintenance. Lies must be supported by more lies. Manipulation creates tension and distrust. Over time, this structure becomes too fragile to sustain itself. The warning, therefore, is not only moral but practical. What is built on falsehood cannot last. There is also a deeper dimension of accountability present in the message. The psalm suggests that speech is part of a larger moral framework in which actions, intentions, and words are all subject to evaluation. This perspective challenges the idea that words are insignificant or easily dismissed. Instead, it presents them as meaningful expressions that contribute to the overall direction of a person's life. What is spoken shapes relationships, influences communities, and reflects inner alignment with truth or falsehood. At the same time, the warning is not only directed outward, it invites personal reflection. Rather than focusing solely on identifying harmful speech in others, it calls for an inward examination. Where do our own words fall within this framework? Are they aligned with honesty and integrity? Or are they influenced by ego, fear, or unresolved emotion? This shift from external judgment to internal awareness transforms the warning into an opportunity for growth. The clarity of Psalm 5 removes ambiguity. It does not attempt to soften the reality of harmful speech or present it as something trivial. Instead, it acknowledges its seriousness while pointing toward a standard rooted in truth. In doing so, it encourages a conscious approach to communication, one that recognizes the power of words and the responsibility that comes with using them. Self-awareness before judgment is a principle that challenges one of the most instinctive human tendencies, the urge to evaluate others before examining oneself. When it comes to harmful speech, this tendency becomes even more pronounced. It is often easier to identify negativity, deception, or cruelty in the words of others than to recognize similar patterns within our own language. Yet, without self-awareness, any attempt to address the issue remains incomplete and, at times, even hypocritical. Judgment in its immediate form provides a sense of clarity and control. Labeling someone else's words as wrong or harmful can create a temporary feeling of moral superiority. It allows us to distance ourselves from the behavior and affirm our own sense of rightness. However, this outward focus can also act as a distraction. By concentrating on the faults of others, we avoid the discomfort of looking inward. Self-awareness requires a level of honesty that is not always easy to embrace. To become aware of one's own speech is to slow down and observe patterns that often go unnoticed. It involves paying attention not only to what is said, but also to the tone, intention, and emotional state behind the words. Why do certain situations trigger irritation or defensiveness? Why does the tongue sometimes react before the mind has fully processed what is happening? These questions are not meant to create guilt, but to deepen understanding. One of the challenges of self-awareness is that it reveals contradictions. A person may value kindness yet speak harshly under pressure. They may believe in honesty but occasionally distort the truth to avoid discomfort. These inconsistencies are part of the human experience, but they also highlight the gap between intention and action. Recognizing this gap is essential for growth. Without awareness, patterns remain automatic. With awareness, they become choices. Another important aspect is emotional responsibility. Often, individuals justify harmful speech by pointing to external circumstances. They may argue that someone else provoked them or that the situation demanded a strong response. While context does influence behavior, it does not remove responsibility. Self-awareness shifts the focus from blaming external factors to understanding internal reactions. It acknowledges that while we cannot control everything that happens to us, we can learn to understand and guide how we respond. There is also a deeper level of humility involved in this process. When a person becomes aware of their own capacity for harmful speech, it becomes more difficult to view others in purely negative terms. Instead of seeing people as entirely right or wrong, there is a recognition of shared human struggle. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior, but it does soften the tendency to judge harshly without understanding. Developing self-awareness is not an instant transformation. It requires consistent reflection and a willingness to pause in moments of reaction. Practices such as mindful observation, honest self-questioning, and even seeking feedback from others can contribute to this process. Over time, these efforts create space between impulse and expression, allowing for more intentional communication. As awareness grows, judgment begins to lose its immediate hold. The focus shifts from labeling others to refining one's own behavior. Words become more deliberate, less reactive, and more aligned with personal values. In this way, self-awareness does not eliminate the need to recognize harmful speech in the world, but it ensures that such recognition is grounded in understanding rather than impulse. The impact of toxic language on others is often deeper and more enduring than it appears in the moment it is spoken. Words have the ability to shape perception, influence emotion, and alter the way individuals see themselves and the world around them. Unlike physical harm, which may leave visible marks, the effects of harmful speech can remain hidden, quietly affecting a person's inner life long after the words have been spoken. When someone is repeatedly exposed to negative or demeaning language, it begins to influence their self-concept. A careless insult, a harsh criticism, or a pattern of belittling remarks can slowly erode confidence. Over time, individuals may start to internalize these messages, questioning their worth, their abilities, and their place in relationships. What begins as external negativity can become an internal voice, repeating the same judgments even in the absence of the original speaker. Toxic language also affects emotional well-being. Words that carry anger, contempt, or manipulation can trigger stress responses in the body and mind. A person who is frequently subjected to such communication may experience anxiety, tension, or a constant sense of unease. They may become overly cautious, trying to avoid situations that could lead to further verbal harm. This creates an environment where openness and authenticity are replaced by fear and self-protection. In relationships, the presence of harmful speech can gradually break down trust. Communication is the foundation of connection, and when that communication becomes toxic, the sense of safety begins to disappear. Individuals may feel misunderstood, unvalued, or even attacked. As a result, they may withdraw emotionally or respond defensively, leading to cycles of conflict that are difficult to resolve. The relationship becomes less about mutual understanding and more about managing tension. Another significant impact is the distortion of reality. Toxic language often involves exaggeration, blame, or manipulation. When someone is repeatedly told that they are the problem, that their feelings are invalid, or that their perceptions are wrong, they may begin to doubt their own judgment. This can lead to confusion and a loss of confidence in one's ability to interpret situations accurately. In some cases, individuals may become dependent on others for validation, further reinforcing unhealthy dynamics. The effects are not limited to individuals, they can extend to groups and communities. Environments where negative language is normalized tend to foster division and mistrust. Gossip, criticism, and hostility can spread quickly, shaping the culture of the group. Over time, this can reduce cooperation, weaken relationships, and create an atmosphere where people feel guarded rather than supported. It is also important to recognize that the impact of toxic language can accumulate. A single negative comment may be brushed aside, but repeated exposure creates a pattern that is harder to ignore. Each instance adds to the overall effect, making it more difficult for individuals to maintain a stable sense of self and emotional balance. The cumulative nature of harmful speech is what gives it such lasting influence. At the same time, awareness of this impact highlights the responsibility that comes with communication. Words are not neutral, they carry energy and intention. When used carelessly, they can cause harm that extends far beyond the moment of speaking. When used thoughtfully, they have the potential to support, uplift, and create understanding. Recognizing the weight of language encourages a more conscious approach to how we speak and how we respond to others. Healing the tongue by healing the self begins with the recognition that speech is not an isolated function. It is deeply connected to one's inner state. Thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and past experiences all converge to shape what is ultimately expressed through words. If the inner world is unsettled, conflicted, or wounded, the tongue often reflects that reality. Attempting to change speech without addressing the internal source is like trying to control the surface of water while ignoring the current beneath it. The process of healing starts with awareness. A person must first notice their patterns of communication without immediately judging or suppressing them. This involves observing how they speak in different situations: when they are calm, when they are stressed, when they feel threatened, or when they seek validation. By paying attention to these patterns, they begin to see the connection between their emotional state and their choice of words. This awareness creates the foundation for meaningful change. Once awareness is established, the next step involves understanding the origins of these patterns. Harmful or reactive speech often has roots in past experiences. It may be linked to moments of rejection, environments where certain forms of communication were normalized, or unresolved emotional pain. Exploring these origins requires honesty and at times discomfort. It means acknowledging that the way one speaks today may be influenced by experiences that have not been fully processed or understood. Emotional regulation plays a crucial role in this process. When individuals learn to recognize and manage their emotions, they create space between feeling and expression. Instead of reacting immediately, they can pause, reflect, and choose their words more intentionally. This does not mean suppressing emotions, but rather engaging with them in a way that does not cause harm to oneself or others. Developing this skill takes practice, but it gradually transforms the way communication unfolds. Another important aspect is the reshaping of internal dialogue. The way people speak to themselves often mirrors how they speak to others. If the inner voice is critical, harsh, or unforgiving, it is likely to be reflected outwardly. By cultivating a more balanced and compassionate internal dialogue, individuals begin to change the tone of their external communication. This shift is subtle but powerful, as it aligns speech with a more grounded and self-aware state of mind. Healing the self also involves taking responsibility. It requires acknowledging the impact of one's words without deflecting blame or justifying harmful behavior. This sense of responsibility is not about guilt, but about ownership. When individuals accept that their speech has consequences, they become more mindful of how they use it. This awareness encourages intentionality and reduces impulsive or reactive language. There is also a relational dimension to this healing process. As individuals work on themselves, their interactions with others begin to change. Communication becomes less about reacting and more about understanding. Listening improves, empathy deepens, and the need to dominate or defend through words diminishes. This creates a more balanced dynamic where dialogue replaces conflict. The transformation of speech is not immediate. It unfolds gradually as inner healing progresses. There may still be moments of inconsistency where old patterns resurface. However, with continued awareness and effort, these moments become less frequent and less intense. Over time, the tongue begins to reflect a more integrated and conscious self, where words are chosen not out of impulse, but out of clarity and intention.